This presentation is about invasive species and how they can affect ecosystem services and human well-being. What are invasive alien species? Invasive alien species, or IAS, are non-native species that have been introduced to a certain environment. While the invasive species can have a positive effect on the environment or local human well-being, they typically have negative effects that threaten the ecosystem, habitat, and/or native species. The invasive species can be introduced accidentally or intentionally. For example, most introductions of zebra mussels have been accidental. An example of intentional introduction of an invasive species is kudzu. Kudzu was introduced into the United States in 1876 for erosion control. Presently, kudzu covers about 3 million hectares in the eastern United States. The extreme expansion of kudzu is an unintended negative outcome because kudzu smothers other plants and hogs most of the sunlight. Kudzu also covers buildings and impacts air quality.
I will be presenting the cost of invasive species. But first, before that, I want to define the ecosystem services. The first ecosystem service is provisioning services, which are ecosystem services that provide the material or energy outputs from ecosystems, which include things such as food, timber, fiber, and water. The next one is regulating services, which is the benefits obtained from the regulation of ecosystems, which include things such as climate regulation, waste management, and water purification. The last service I will be talking about is the cultural service. It is defined as attributes of ecosystems that are non-consumptive, such as spiritual enrichment, intellectual development, and reincarnation. I will be discussing the cost of invasive species. Some costs listed under provision services would include reduced crop yield and $7.65 million lost annually in livestock forage. Some costs listed under regulated services would include a contribution to climate warming and negative impacts to water quality. Some costs listed under cultural service would include yellow star thistle has decreased the recreation value and billions of dollars in medical bills from red imported fire ants.
Invasive species can also have a positive effect on the environment that they are introduced into. They can provide valuable resources such as firewood and charcoal, and they also regulate the air, water, and soil. IASs also provide cultural services and can become integrated in spiritual practices. Synergies and trade-offs. Invasive alien species, when introduced intentionally, are introduced with a benefit in mind, but a lot of the time there are negative effects as well, which lead to drawbacks. In South Africa, for example, woody plant invasive alien species were introduced to increase profit in the forest products industry and to provide fuel wood and building supplies to the local community. While these goals were achieved, negative impacts became apparent as well. Fires became more frequent and the available water decreased by 30% for the people downstream from the invasive woody plants. All of these negative effects led to policy action.
Next, we will discuss control of invasive species. Firstly, because it is easier to prevent species from being introduced than to control existing invasive species, most research is focused on prevention and predicting how a species can impact an ecosystem. Secondly, losses to invasive species are spread through many stakeholders, making impacts to the economy minimal. As a result, few industries are concerned about invasive species, and little pressure is placed on the government to change or more heavily enforce regulations. As mentioned in the article, some methods for controlling invasive species include more thorough inspections for species in international borders. Global trade and travel is one of the biggest contributors to introducing invasive species. Another measure is increasing regulation compliance through taxes, fines, and utilizing grants. And a third measure is increasing education about invasive alien species and their impacts. One example of direct measures being taken to control invasive alien species is the removal of woody plant IAS in South Africa, shown in the image to the left. Woody plant IAS does benefit the forestry industry and provide wood to local communities, but it is very detrimental to the ecosystem, including loss of water downstream, negatively impacting pollination and ecotourism, displacing native plants, and increasing fires, erosion, and runoff. An initiative using economic incentives was created to remove the woody plant IAS from the ecosystem, and this initiative was called Working for Water. It's a government-funded program to provide income to poor citizens while also restoring hydrological services to the ecosystem.
In conclusion, invasive alien species are species that are introduced to an environment, and typically they have negative effects on said environment. A few of the examples of IAS in Kentucky are zebra mussels, bush honeysuckle, and kudzu. You can see the pictures to the right there. It's vital to understand the possible drawbacks of introducing an invasive species because the negative effects might be too great. For example, the woody plant in South Africa, it can take a long time and cost a lot of money to recover from those effects.